The morning broke hard and colorless, a pale knife of light slicing through the warped boards of the ranch house. Dust floated in that narrow beam, slow and silent as drifting ash. The young woman stood barefoot on the rough plank floor, clutching a wool blanket against her chest. It smelled of cedar and the faint sweetness of her late mother's perfume. Behind her, the door groaned open. Heavy boots thudded, each step a warning. The stepfather filled the doorway, shoulders broad, eyes bloodshot from another night with cards and whiskey. He reeked of smoke and sour ale. "You think you can keep this place from me?" His voice was a gravel scrape. She stiffened but did not turn. "It's not yours." Her whisper barely reached the rafters. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "Everything here is mine." His hand shot out, fingers like iron. He yanked the blanket from her grip, the fabric tearing with a sound like dry thunder. She stumbled back, catching herself on the table edge. "Stop!" The blanket ripped again under his fists, threads snapping like gunfire. "I'll tear their world apart," he snarled, breath hot with liquor. "Your mama's dreams, your little memories, gone." The room held its breath. Dust motes swirled in the shaft of morning light, tiny planets spinning around a collapsing sun. She pressed a palm to her racing heart, tasting copper in her mouth. He hurled the shredded cloth to the floor. "Remember that when you think you're stronger than me." Silence stretched until even the wind outside seemed to shy away. He spat, turned, and stomped out, boots grinding the torn blanket into the dirt. She knelt, fingers trembling over the frayed edges, the scent of cedar now mixed with sweat and rage. A single ray of sunlight warmed her cheek. She closed her eyes. The ranch was not his. The land, the horizon, the quiet strength in her own breath, none of it belonged to him, Faye. Or beyond the corral, a lone rider moved along the ridge, a dark figure against the pale sky. She didn't see him yet, but the distant rhythm of hooves reached her like a promise carried on the wind. The sun had climbed like a cruel overseer, burning the desert flat and white. Heat shimmered across the road, twisting the horizon into a false mirage of water. The young woman stumbled through it, wrists chafed raw where rope had bitten. Every breath scraped her throat like sandpaper. The wagon that brought her here was a fading speck now, wheels rattling away with a laugh that lived only in memory. Her stepfather's voice still echoed sharp and ragged. "No one will find you, not out here." She pressed onward, boots sinking into dust. The air tasted of rust and sun-scorched sage. Sweat streaked her temples, then vanished in the dry wind. Her lips cracked until a bead of blood blossomed. "Help! Anyone!" she rasped, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. A vulture wheeled overhead, its shadow sliding over her like a dark sail. The ground pitched. She dropped to her knees, palms grinding into gravel. The rope around her wrists loosened only enough to remind her of captivity. Her mind slipped. She saw water that wasn't there. Cool creeks from childhood, a lake where her mother once sang. The vision flickered and broke, leaving only heat. "Get up," she told herself. The words were thought, not breath. "Get up, or you die." She forced her legs beneath her, swaying like a newborn foal. The sun hammered down, relentless. A dry creek bed yawned ahead, its cracked mud like the hide of some dead beast. She staggered toward it and collapsed. For a long time she lay there, face against the parched earth. A faint tremor stirred through the ground, distant, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat, hoofbeats. Her eyes opened. A blur moved along the far ridge, dark against the burning sky. She tried to call out. Only a whisper escaped. The figure grew clearer. A rider, steady and unhurried, horse dark as midnight. The sound of hooves grew into a low drumbeat, promising life. She managed a feeble wave. Her vision swam, edges blackening. The last thing she felt before the world tipped into darkness was the shadow of a horse passing over her body, cool and vast as a cloud. Lantern light spilled a soft amber across the rancher's porch as dusk bled into night. The young woman lay slumped in the saddle before him, her head resting against his chest, breath thin but steady. The steady rhythm of his horse's hooves echoed like a heartbeat across the open plain. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of pine smoke and clean hay. He carried her in as though she weighed nothing, boots clicking on the wooden floor. A kettle hissed on the stove. The room glowed warm and golden, a world away from the killing sun. He set her gently on a narrow bed, pulled a quilt around her shoulders, and crouched beside her. Weathered hands checked her pulse, brushed dust from her cheek. His voice was low, the drawl of a man who'd spent a lifetime talking to horses more than people. "You're safe now," he said. Her eyelids fluttered. "Why? Help me?" "Because a man doesn't leave someone to die in the dirt," he answered. No flourish, only truth. She tried to sit, but winced. "He'll come. He always does." "Not while I'm breathing," the rancher said, a quiet steel in the words. He poured water into a tin cup, held it to her cracked lips. She drank greedily, eyes closing as cool relief flooded her. Outside, the wind rattled a shutter, but inside the cabin, time slowed to the pace of the flickering flame. The rancher studied her face, bruises along the jaw, a rope burn circling one wrist. His jaw tightened. "Who did this?" "My stepfather," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. His gaze lowered. "Figures." He set the cup aside and rose, every movement deliberate. "You'll stay here tonight. We'll figure the rest come sunrise." Silence stretched, broken only by the stove's soft crack. "Wally." She traced the quilt's stitching with trembling fingers, the first comfort she'd felt in days. From the porch came the sound of the horse shifting, then the quiet sweep of the prairie wind. The rancher watched the door, shoulders squared, a silhouette carved from oak. For the first time since the desert, she believed in the possibility of dawn. The evening bled crimson across the prairie, the sky streaked with the color of old scars. Inside the cabin, lantern light trembled on rough-hewn walls. The young woman sat near the hearth, a quilt around her shoulders, the rancher standing at the window like a weathered sentinel. A low thud echoed across the yard, hoofbeats, slow and mean. The rancher's hand went to the rifle leaning against the wall. Dust swirled in the last of the sun as a lone rider emerged from the darkening trail. The stepfather swung from the saddle, whiskey bottle dangling from one hand, pistol from the other. His face was a ruin of drink and rage. "You think you can hide her?" he called, voice slicing through the quiet. "She's mine. Always will be." The rancher stepped onto the porch, boots grinding against dry wood. "Not tonight," he said evenly. "Not ever again." The outlaw laughed, a sound cracked and hollow. "You got no claim. She's blood. You're just a fool with a fence." "She's not property," the rancher replied, his tone iron cold. "Leave now, or the sheriff will take you instead of me." The young woman rose behind the doorframe, heart hammering. She could smell the sour tang of whiskey even from inside. The stepfather staggered forward, raising his pistol. "Law don't scare me. Men like me make the law." The rancher didn't flinch. The rifle never left his side, but his eyes held a steadier threat than any weapon. "One more step and you'll regret it." For a long breath, the prairie itself seemed to hold still. Wind stopped. Crickets hushed. His stepfather spat into the dirt, hatred boiling in his stare. Then with a snarl he lowered the gun. "This ain't over," he growled. "I'll be back and I'll burn this place to the ground." The stepfather spat into the dirt, hatred boiling in his stare. Then with a snarl he lowered the gun. "This ain't over," he growled. "I'll be back and I'll burn this place to the ground." He swung into the saddle, spurs flashing in the lantern glow, and kicked the horse hard. Hooves thundered into the night, fading toward the horizon. The rancher lowered the rifle but did not relax. Behind him, the young woman stepped onto the porch, voice a fragile whisper. "He won't stop." "No," the rancher said, eyes on the dark trail. "But neither will we." The wind returned, carrying the scent of distant rain, a promise of storms yet to come. Morning sunlight spilled across the prairie, cool and silver after a night of uneasy silence. The young woman stood on the porch, quilt wrapped tight, watching the horizon for trouble. Inside, the rancher brewed coffee, the hiss of the pot the only sound. Hoofbeats approached, slow and deliberate. A badge glinted in the early light as Sheriff Halden rode in, his horse a broad-shouldered bay. Dust curled around him like a traveling storm. He dismounted with the weight of a man who'd seen too many dawns like this one. "Morning," the sheriff said, voice steady as the land itself. The rancher nodded. "Appreciate you coming so quick." The young woman stepped forward, clutching the quilt. "He'll be back. You have to stop him." Halden studied her bruised wrists, his eyes narrowing. "Name?" "Doyle," she whispered. "My stepfather." The sheriff sighed, thumb grazing the brim of his hat. "He's been trouble before. Cards, whiskey, bad debts. Hard to pin down." The rancher crossed his arms. "He tied her up and left her to die. That's more than trouble." Halden met the rancher's gaze, steel against steel. "I need a statement. Judge won't move without it." Inside the cabin, lanterns still burned from the night. The sheriff laid out paper and ink on the table. The young woman sat, voice low but unwavering as she recounted the desert, the rope, the threats. Each word carried the weight of gravel. "Good," Halden said when she finished, signing his name with a sharp stroke. "This gives me cause to issue a warrant." He rose, the badge catching firelight. "But paper alone won't keep him off you. Doyle's the type to test the law." The rancher rested a hand on the rifle, leaning by the door. "Then we'll be ready." The sheriff's eyes flicked to the rifle, then back to the young woman. "Stay close. Keep lanterns lit. If he comes before I do, hold fast." She swallowed, voice barely above a breath. "Will the law be enough?" Halden tipped his hat, a grim nod. "Law's only as strong as the people who stand behind it. But I'll stand." As he rode away, dust rose like a warning. The rancher watched the trail, jaw tight, knowing the paper notice nailed to Doyle's door might as well have been a spark in dry grass. Night came restless and black, a windless hush before a storm. The young woman sat near the hearth, lantern light flickering across her bruised face. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and dark. The rancher checked the rifle by the door, every motion deliberate, ears straining against the silence. Then came the sound, distant at first, a low drumbeat of hooves, more than one. Torches glowed along the ridge, orange sparks against the moonlight. "They're here," the rancher said, voice flat as steel. The young woman's breath caught. Through the window she saw them, 5 riders, torches swaying, laughter sharp and cruel. Her stepfather led the pack, whiskey grin splitting his face. "Light 'em up, boys," Doyle bellowed. Flames licked the night as the gang fanned out around the ranch. The smell of kerosene and sweat drifted in. Horses stamped, snorted, wild with the scent of fire. The rancher threw a bolt across the door. "Get to the loft," he ordered. "I'm not hiding," she said, though her voice trembled. "Up," he barked, eyes never leaving the window. "Now." She climbed the ladder as a bottle crashed against the porch, shattering in a blossom of flame. Shadows of men lunged across the walls. The rancher fired a warning shot into the dark. "That's far enough." Doyle laughed, the sound cutting like barbed wire. "You think a single man can stop me? Burn it all." 2 riders charged the barn, torches whipping. The rancher swung the door open and fired again, the crack echoing across the plain. A torch fell, sputtering. One rider cursed, pulling back. The young woman crouched in the loft, heart pounding, watching through a slit in the boards. Smoke curled through the rafters. The gang shouted, rattling shutters, testing doors. "Come out, old man," Doyle taunted, "or I drag her out myself." The rancher stepped into the doorway, silhouette framed by firelight. "Not tonight," he said, voice like a loaded gun. Another shot rang out, this one closer. One of Doyle's men howled, clutching a bleeding arm. The others faltered, torches wavering. But Doyle stood firm, eyes burning hotter than the flames. "This ends when I say so," he roared, lifting his pistol toward the cabin. The night held its breath, the next move hanging like a spark in dry grass.